Even when I am in my studio, it always feels really good to hold your camera, doesn't it? Maybe it's me. Today's video is dedicated to how to master aperture and shutter speed in long exposure photography. Follow this video because I'm going to tell you everything I know in order to achieve the best exposure possible in long exposure photography. Welcome to my channel. Here we talk about photography and I make videos just like this one where I share some tips and techniques to take better pictures. So if you're here for the first time, it might be a good idea to subscribe. Since I made my long exposure tutorial that if you didn't see yet, you will find it right here, I received a lot of questions about exposure and shutter speed, manual mode, aperture priority, what am I using? And I understand, because it might sound a little complicated. I mentioned that I use aperture priority, but then I switch into manual mode. Let me explain why. Let's start with the aperture. I'm sure that most of you saw my landscape photography camera settings video. In that video, I explain why I prefer to use aperture priority, but going quickly through this concept again, I mainly want to accomplish two things. I want to have the maximum sharpness possible, and I also want to have a very wide depth of field. Basically, in most of my images, I want to try to have most of the scene, if not all of my scene, in focus. And f8 or f11 are aperture that, with my lenses, will achieve those results. And for any lens that is on the market, the maximum sharpness will be always in the middle of your aperture range. So once I select my aperture, I will take a test shot before putting any neutral density filter in front of my lens. At that point, I will check my histogram. And this is very important because, as I mentioned in last week's videos, it is important to make sure that your exposure will be positioned as much as possible to the right of your histogram, of course without clipping. The reason why is that when we are going to retrieve details from the shadows, we will have better results and we will not bring up any noise while doing this. So if I increase my shadows, I will avoid to get a very noisy image. While if my exposure on the histogram will be positioned all the way to the left, it will mean that possibly this image is slightly underexposed. And I will be correcting this by increasing the shutter speed. So at this point, switch to manual mode, keep the same aperture, and increase the shutter speed until my histogram will move to the right as much as I wish. And now that my histogram looks good, is in the right position, I will make sure to focus, and then I can put my filters in front of my lens. Talking about ND filters means that we are going to talk about shutter speed. Basically, the neutral density filter is what will let you control the shutter speed at this point. Meaning that you can decide to go for a very, very long exposure with a very, very long shutter speed using a super black 15 stops, or a 10 stops, or a 6 stops, or a 3 stops. And you can see that on a 3 stops you can basically see through. On a 15 stops, this is black, you don't see anything. So of course, huge difference in results. Then it's really up to you in deciding what kind of effect you would like to achieve. And people told me, but Attilio, these filters cost a lot of money, which one should I buy? And I agree, these filters cost a lot of money. The ones I'm using here, they are all glass. I will put some link in the description below so you know what I use. But at the same time, if you have to pick your first filter, I would recommend to start with the 10 stop filter. And this is also how I started. Of course, I didn't buy all my filters at the same time. I started with one, and I started with the big stopper from Lee Filter, and I also bought a graduated ND filter. This is a 3 stops soft edge that helped me in decreasing the dynamic range in a photo. And it often happens at sunrise or at sunset that the sky is much brighter than the foreground. This helps me to balance the exposure a lot. I have to say, the combination of the graduated ND filter and the 10 stops is possibly what I use 80% of the time. We were saying how the filters will actually help you to control the shutter speed, and the only thing that you will need is to have an ND calculator application on your phone. I will link a few in the description, but with practice and experience, I guarantee you that you will be able to set your shutter speed without even looking at the app anymore. But one recommendation that I want to give you is that at sunrise and at sunset, most of the time, I don't follow what the app is telling me. And I tell you why. Especially in a very long exposure, the light changes very quickly in those moments. And at sunrise, of course, the scene is becoming brighter and brighter. So if the application is telling me 5 minutes, maybe I take 1 minute out and it will be 4 minutes, because I know that my scene is becoming brighter and brighter, so I don't need such a long exposure. Vice versa, at sunset, because the scene is becoming darker and darker, even if the application is telling me 5 minutes, I may go for 6 or 7 minutes, especially if I want to make sure that my exposure is positioning to the right of my histogram. So decrease the shutter speed at sunrise, increase the shutter speed at sunset. I hope this video, without the waves in the back, the noise, the wind, but relaxed and calm in the studio, will clarify all the questions that I received regarding aperture and shutter speed for long exposure photography. If you have other questions, please write me a comment below. If you like this video, click on the like button. If you're not subscribed yet, I think you should. But in any case, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.